Hi everyone, this is Colleen, and this is Haggie Reads for You on Haggie Shack Radio, simulcast to Wolf Spirit Radio, and it's Friday, June 24th, 2016. And today I'm going to pick up where I left off last week with Children of the Law of One, Lost Teachings of Atlantis by John Peniel. The oneness of all inner selves. The inner self is everyone, is part of the same being, part of the one. When I first heard Zayn speaking on that mysterious TV broadcast, it was really his inner self who was speaking to my inner self. It was the voice of the universal spirit, calling out to and speaking to another part of itself. That's why it rang my inner bell of truth. That's how I could feel and know it was true. But I was ready, no, desperate, to hear. As I, my inner self, speaks to you now, I speak to you as your own inner self. Thus you can feel the truth I speak to you, as if you already know it. The closer you are to your own inner self, the more strongly you will feel this. Those of you who are distant may not feel this, and those who have blocked your inner self will find the words disturbing. The extent of the disturbance will depend on how intensely you are blocking. Finding my true teacher. Speaking of blocks, once I finally arrived at the monastery and actually found myself in the presence of Zayn, all my defensive blocks went up. Like I said earlier, I avoided him like the plague. I even blocked the entire concept of teachers, even though I had no problem being taught daily by elder student teachers in various courses, and even in the orientation I was being given by Anastasia. She was teaching me things. One day the elder student Riga began talking again about the ancient teachings about teachers, and about the need for a personal true teacher, especially as your path winds higher. It was so obvious that Zayn was supposed to be my personal teacher, but I couldn't see that at that time. But it did become obvious that it was time for me to have a teacher. I'd already learned and known from books I'd read before even coming to the monastery about how if you really wanted to transcend your separate self and achieve enlightenment, one of the things you ultimately needed to do was to find, choose, and ask a true teacher to be your teacher. And then it was reinforced by Anastasia, and then in the courses I was taking. But I kept ignoring it. Then one day, Raga was out teaching me the meditation walk technique on a sort of field trip. And as we walked through the snow, coordinating our breathing with our steps, my mind wandered and I numbly thought to myself, where am I going to find my teacher? Out of the blue, Raga all of a sudden stopped and said, go to the library and ask Gabriel which of the ancient texts he thinks you should read about teachers. So I did, and this is what I was given. The candle lights a candle. Thus does the student receive the light from the teacher. A true teacher must first be a good student. The best student is the most humble. He who would be first will be last. Nature abhors a vacuum. The mountain is gradually worn down to fill the valley. Thus the humble and lowly are raised unto the heavens. Knowledge without humility and self-sacrifice is meaningless and can be harmful. A student without humility is like a full cup. Only a clear mirror reflects yourself true. Thus, through the eyes of a true teacher, can one see the deceptions of the selfish, separate self. Thus is the true teacher, the tool that can free you from the illusions yourself has created. Hear me, O man. Chains you have forged that bind you to darkness of night, in servitude you cry. For the dark lords are your master. To serve them no longer, reach out into the night. Call for your brothers that serve only light. A hand will appear, piercing the darkness. Strange love that comes from the light. Grasp on with both hands and clutch with all might. Ripped from darkness, in pain your dark self screams. Let not thy cup fall then, and death will come soon, releasing and revealing the true inner you. In light will you awaken, to find you are whole. In love and in freedom, you find the goal. Life is a teacher, but the hardest teacher and the longest school. To learn from the experiences of others is a great skill indeed. To learn from the true teacher is the path chosen by the wise. All true paths eventually lead to the true teacher. One can go no further until they confront the great beast and unveil its deceptions. The true teacher is one with universal will, one with the universal consciousness, and the servant of all. The true teacher radiates his consciousness just by being. Those in his presence are affected by the light, even when he speaks not. His light evokes fear and anger in the selfish, who live in the darkness of deceit, but nurtures and inspires the gentle, the kind, and the spiritually hungry. The true teacher is your inner being standing before you. If you are receptive to your inner being, you are receptive to the true teacher. If you try to avoid your inner being, you will try to avoid the true teacher. He who listens to a true teacher hears his own inner voice. He who manifests his own inner voice is a true teacher. Now I am the teacher. Now you are the student. I give you my hand and take you home again. The wheel of life turns. Now you are the teacher. Now I am the student. You give me your hand and take me home again. So goes the cycle of life. For children who live the law of one, for brother sun and sister moon, who in harmony with universal will serve all, let go and let God. The self always has good reason to be negative. There is no reason good enough to stop loving. All inner beings are one. Let no being possess you in body, mind, or soul. Heed not to spirits. Guide you would they out of place. Come from the dark, do these spirits, in harmony not with universal flow. Know they not oneness with the all? The children of one light live among men. Your spiritual self are they. Your spiritual self show you they. To be one with all, one with the light. True teachers, masters of self, gone from this earth, commune not with the living. Guide they not in voice or possession. Deceptive spirits come in guises to mislead and misteach those who would have them. Guidance seek ye only from masters in flesh. All true teachers be one with all. As you be in flesh, you need guidance in flesh. To disallow dark deceptions the self does befool. Urge you, do they all, to listen closely and only to the still silent voice of your true inner self. Find it within and find it without, your inner voice reflected, the true teacher in flesh. Well, that was great, but I was still in a quandary. Where could I possibly find my true teacher? Who was my true teacher? And then it hit me. Raga must be my true teacher. I mean, he was informative. He seemed to know my inner thoughts and read my mind. I was very comfortable with him. And most importantly, he was totally unthreatening to me. I didn't know it yet, but that was one of the problems. He was totally unthreatening to me because he did not yet have universal consciousness and was no threat to my selfish, separate self. So while he was wise, knew a lot, channeled well for me in courses and personal growth sessions, and taught me basic meditations, he was not a true teacher. So what did I do? I asked Raga to be my teacher. Raga, I've been thinking about who my personal true teacher should be, and I'd like it to be you. Would you accept me as your student? He hesitated for a moment, a bit surprised, and then he accepted. Yes, I would be honored, he said proudly. He was so proud, too proud. In fact, it struck me as odd, but more importantly, made me feel odd. One of the signs that you are ready to be a true teacher is that someone asks you to be their teacher. The trouble was, the other signs weren't there. And I didn't know it at the time that only initiates, adept monks, were really qualified and capable of being a true teacher. And Raga, not being free from his separate self, went on quite an ego trip about being asked to be my teacher. His ego was as puffed up as a blowfish. He'd stumbled into one of the great traps that can snare you if you're not enlightened, and a spiritual ego. Anyway, Raga was actually one of Zain's students, and when Raga went and told Zain about it, Raga's ego trip had become an ego rip. The blowfish was served on a platter with rice and tamari sauce. The next thing I knew, Raga was apologizing to me for misleading me and saying he'd be my teacher. Even though I'm teaching you, obviously in that sense, I am a teacher to you. I am not yet a true teacher. I am not enlightened, for one thing, and I am definitely not your personal true teacher. Then who is? That is for you to determine. Great. Back to square one. The true teacher. Much later, after I finally got it through my thick ego that Zain was my true teacher, he taught me about what makes a true teacher and how they teach through more than words. Father, what would you say the difference is between a true teacher and a teacher? When a person attains universal consciousness, they are done. They are finally free, and again one with God. Their karma has been resolved and stands neutral. They are adepts, full initiates. At that time, they choose whether to leave this plane or stay on to help awaken the spirit within those who are still lost in the darkness of the separate self. Those who leave the plane we call ascended, and they work within the hierarchy. Those who stay are the true teachers of our order. By true, we mean true in the sense of alignment, an undistorted mirror, or how a true arrow will be on target. A true teacher, having universal consciousness, has made the great connection, found the balance of self-serving spirit, and lives thusly. They outwardly manifest the spirit, which again is the same spirit within us all, in words, actions, and being. A regular teacher does not. They have only knowledge, wisdoms to give in their lives. I can understand how the actions would be different and would make for a substantially different way of teaching through their life example. But their being, you emphasize that. What does that mean? Do you know that when a tuning fork is struck and begins to vibrate, other tuning forks of the same pitch that are in the vicinity will also begin to vibrate? In other words, if you strike a tuning fork that vibrates to the note C, all other C-pitch tuning forks in the area will vibrate also. Yes, I've actually studied this in great detail and tried to understand it metaphysically even, but I've gotten nowhere. In fact, I've been meaning to ask you. You will. But this isn't the time for going on about that. Discipline your mind now and focus on the subject we are discussing now. When we come into contact with a true teacher, it has a quickening or awakening effect on the same consciousness within everyone. This happens in very much the same way as the tuning forks. The teacher's intense internal vibration of the universal spirit radiates powerful energy waves which vibrate and stimulate the universal spirit in all others near him. People will feel different by being in the presence of such a one. It actually can change their lives by affecting a stranger passing by. Some will notice they feel differently and wonder why. Wonder what made them feel such things when no one even said anything. Others won't. Those who are tuned in to or sensitive to their own inner being will be aware of this effect. But the effect takes place regardless of whether or not someone is aware of it happening or not, or is open to it or not. For those who are spiritually inclined, this feels good. The more spiritually inclined a person is, the more wonderful it feels. It's like gourmet food to a starving person, or an oasis in the desert to a person dying of thirst. But those who are not spiritually inclined, those who have suppressed and hidden from their own spirit within, find the presence of such a person to be disturbing, making them uneasy, agitated, and even hostile in some cases. Those whose separate selves are well in control of their being do in fact become progressively and expressly more negative as the truth encroaches. This is because the separate self fears the fire of spirit, knowing well that its all-consuming flames can mean the end of its reign, and ultimately its existence. The irony in all this is that after the separate self finally gives up and takes its natural place as a servant to the spirit, it too finds peace, happiness, and harmony with the universe. It is just a great folly to hide from the eternal light. An instrument the universal spirit radiates through. I understand. I felt disturbed by your presence when I was first here, but now I cherish our time together. I can't get enough. I know I have so little time to give you, but you're getting what you need, I assure you. Oh, I know how busy you are, Father. I didn't mean to complain, only to compliment. I know. Anyway, how do teachers do this, though? The radiating of spirit that has these effects. Is it just from being enlightened, or is it a technique we learn later on? We learn techniques that open our channels, so to speak, and help us make the most of certain energies or abilities. But the actual process of the universal spirit affecting people through teachers is not a technique or something consciously done. It is just one of the effects of being one with God. It is guided by the hierarchy and determined by universal will. The teacher doesn't need to do anything, doesn't need to say anything. They may or may not even know what is specifically happening to others through them. True teaching happens. It is done by just being. It's like an invisible radiation that permeates everything and everyone. The effect of a being who is one with universal consciousness comes of its own accord, like that of sunlight from the sun. The sun doesn't contrive radiating light or work at it. It just does by its nature. The same with a teacher. A teacher does not preach. Like the difference in the words teacher and preacher, the T in teacher touches, while the P in preacher proposes and pushes. While an adept teacher's words may have an illuminating effect, teaching is done through effect and example, not just words. When your consciousness is thus pervaded with the virtues of unselfish love and universal consciousness, such as inner peace, harmony, beauty, grace, etc., these virtues affect and influence automatically, through osmosis and resonance, just by being around. It seems like everyone should be a true teacher, or at least enlightened. Help wanted, apply inside. True. Ultimately, all should either become teachers upon enlightenment or go to the next plane. We don't belong here. We are angelic travelers who got stuck by falling into a trap and creating one hellish resort plane amongst an infinity of resorts of peace and beauty. Naturally, this earth, this plane, could be such a paradisiacal place if all were enlightened. But even then, why stay in one little room when you have such a grand estate as the universe? At this point in time and space, right now, here on earth, unless you are either a true teacher or ascended, at best you are dead weight, living in the pain and suffering of being separate from one. And also, to one degree or another, a pawn on the dark side. At worst, some actually join the dark side. Even a student is bound in the dark play until they are enlightened. At the time, I couldn't really understand why the heck anyone would want to stay here once they attained enlightenment and were free. I was about to go kill myself minutes before the TV broadcast showing Zayn. I'd asked this when I was younger, but I never did get it. So I ask again. Why do some choose to stay and some choose to go on and enjoy life with other loving ascended beings? Actually, most choose to stay, at least for a while, for teaching is a natural result of attaining oneness with the universal spirit through unselfish love. Why is teaching the natural result? It seems like the natural result would be to go on and join those of your own level of consciousness, rather than stay here in hell, totally surrounded by selfish jerks. The very nature of the unselfish love that was required to attain enlightenment and universal consciousness requires compassion, and the attainment gives a person even more compassion. That urges you to stay and help be a teacher. Isn't it hard, though, Father? He sighed deeply and looked off as if he had tears in his eyes, but that he was so cried out that there were no tears left. Hard is not the word for it, and teaching is the most unappreciated job, the hardest job, and the most painful job in the world. Since the teacher is the instrument of exposing, dethroning the selfish separate self by virtue of reflecting the light of truth, the separate self really hates the teacher. It is one thing to feel this from strangers and the dark ones, but since the elder or novice student at most stages still really thinks, feels, and believes that they are the separate self, the student often is in conflict with the teacher. Thus, the teacher experiences that the people he is closest to in the world, his students, both hate and love him. More hate than love, because the separate self is still in such control of the student. It is a terrible feeling for the teacher, but it is what he must endure, and the price he must pay, to help free others from the bonds of their selfish, separate self. You often feel this way towards me yourself, my son. No! Sadly, the truth was yes. While I loved him more than I could ever imagine loving anyone, I often hated him periodically, and that hurt him deeply. I didn't know how badly until my time to be a teacher came. I guess it's the old parental curse. Someday you'll grow up and have kids, and God forbid they treat you this way. Then you'll see. I want to help, Father. I want to be a teacher. Is there anything I can do to speed it up? Before you can be a good teacher, you must first be a good student. To be able to fully give, you must first have fully given up. A cup cannot be filled unless it is first empty. Real teaching cannot be contrived, cannot be something you try to do. It will come in its own time, when you have totally surrendered to the universal spirit and become an instrument of that will, not when you want to be a teacher. And think carefully. If you stay to be a teacher, new karma is created, and you are no longer absolved of all your past karma. Teaching begins the final stage of dealing with your karma, and brings with it the most difficult times of your life. You also take on karma from your students. Finding your teacher. I've already told you of part of my personal experience in finding my teacher in this lifetime, but there are a few more details you may want to hear about, should you choose to have a personal true teacher. There are several steps in getting a teacher. Such a relationship takes two people, and it is a two-way street. For there to be a teacher, there must be a student. The teacher must be true, universally conscious, and thus radiating universal spirit. And the student must be receptive. Otherwise, little or nothing will happen. So number one, you must be truly willing, receptive, humble, and ready to be a good student. Next, you must find a teacher and discriminate their validity. Make sure they are real, not a charlatan, and right for you on your path. Once you think you have found your personal true teacher, you must then deal with any doubts or reservations you may have. Then, when you're sure, ask the teacher to help you, and totally commit. Dedicate yourself as a student. Unfortunately, true teachers are rare, very rare. There are various kinds of true teachers of different paths, but only some are specifically right for you and where you are at on your path. As far as the true teachers of the Atlantean children of the Law of One are concerned, there have always been about 1,000 of them on Earth at any given time, fluctuating according to births and deaths, old teachers choosing to leave, new teachers arising, etc. But when you consider that there are about 5 billion people on the planet, the ratio was pretty thin already. And now, after the attacks, there are only hundreds of true teachers. And at best, you only get a chance at one in your lifetime. There may be many different teachers we find along the way who are helpful to our development. But most of us just have one special teacher who is meant for us, perfect for us, because they are from our particular soul group or near it. Father, was finding a true teacher always the same? I already know what happens with our tradition, but what about those who are not, but once were and have gone so far off their path, but that are now looking to return? Or what about those of other paths that need or want to change to this path? What do the ancient teachings say about how to find a true teacher for those who are not already of the children of the Law of One? There are no teachings of the Atlantean children on this, for it was the path for those who fell from their spiritual state in those days, at least of the Atlanteans, and even for some of those of Mu and the others, who originally belonged to our general soul groups. Thus, it is newer ancient teachings that deal with such things. But regardless of the path, it's always been the same, whether it was praying for guidance or finding a true teacher. It involves an inner change and an inner crying out. You have said I am to write about the teachings for the masses in the future. What should I say about this specifically? Specifically, for finding a teacher, there are 2 things to be done, 2 ways. Write down this, Peniel. This you should write. If you really want a true teacher, you call for your teacher. You do an affirmation inside yourself, proclaiming before the universal spirit, declaring, with meaning and feeling, that you are ready to really go for it, that you want whatever you need to change and become one with God, that you are ready to be purified. Once you have really done this, and really begun to listen to your own inner being through your inner voice, that still, silent voice of truth, then you're ready, and it is time. Then you will find your teacher. But don't expect your teacher to be wearing a sign or seek you out and say, "Hey, I'm your teacher." It's your duty to seek, find, and initiate the contract. And don't ignore the obvious. It may be one who was already there in your life for some time, but that you did not have eyes to see previously because you weren't ready. You may not have even known the person was a teacher, depending on their guise. Most likely, it may be a new player who shows up in your life, or someone you heard about from another source, and it's your responsibility to seek him out from there. However, whoever, or whatever the circumstances, your true teacher comes into your life because you have called or prayed for such help and guidance, not because he's looking for students. Making sure you found a true teacher. Let's say someone has done that and they think they found a true teacher. What do the teachings say about how to be sure you have a true teacher? This is a dilemma that has always existed. There are so very many fakes and fakers out there, appealing to selfish spiritual ego trips. It's a lucrative business for greedy fakes. And the separate self wants people to choose the fakes, or the unenlightened rather than the true teachers. So people must be very discriminating about who is or isn't a true teacher before they become the student. Why before they've become their student, Father? A person can just leave any time they realize the person is a fake, right? True, but sometimes there are teachers along a person's path, fake or real, that are not your true teachers, yet they are part of your path. And you are meant to leave them when your consciousness expands past what theirs is, or what they can offer. They're stepping stones to the sincere seeker, and traps to the insecure. But your true teacher is the only one that represents the ultimate demise of the selfish separate self, and the return of control to your inner being, to the will of the universal spirit. So to those who think they are the separate self, which is everyone who is not enlightened, the true teacher is the hardest one to deal with, one yourself wants to run away from like a scared animal, and at the same time, the one most desirable and attractive to your inner self, your true self. So you must discriminate clearly before you dedicate to being a student, because after you really do find a true teacher and commit and dedicate to being his student, your separate self will begin working on ways to get away, to escape its fate in this life and death struggle. It will generate false inner voices in attempts to confuse and mislead you, and make you think it is not your true teacher, or many other things in an attempt to mislead you and get you away from the true teacher. And thus, you will need to stick by your decision to get through it, regardless of all this misleading, which can seem very real and valid. This requires great respect, humility, commitment, and dedication that should not be retracted once the decision is made, unless there are truly inner voice alarms going off that something is very, very wrong. We have compiled a list of a few things that may help you make this prior discrimination. The list is not complete, however, and there are other warning signs of a fake, and the list may not apply to some teachers, because they are not fakes, yet they may not be an enlightened true teacher. Plus, these things are not written in stone, and you need to use your own judgment, common sense, and inner voice. Finally, do not use the list to judge your teacher after you have decided that they are your true teacher, because it is probably your separate self trying to deceive you with realizations and a false inner voice in order to find an excuse to leave your teacher or give up. Possible signs of a false teacher. 1. Charging money. Unfortunately, the truth of the matter is that there are people out there who claim to be teachers, guides, gurus, channelers, or whatever, who are actually just con artists, who are in it for the ego trip, for money, power, or all of the above. I'm not talking about psychic readers, therapists, seminar, or lecture givers who do a limited, specific service for a fee, whether legitimate or not. I'm talking about those who claim to be teachers and say they want to help free you from your pain, your bonds, and transform your life spiritually, or give you important spiritual knowledge, and to put a price on it. There is no way a truly compassionate being could put a price on this. Could you think of a justification to deny peace of mind and attaining enlightenment because of money? It is one thing if there are truly allowances to provide free spiritual aid for anyone who really has no financial capability. But in general, if someone is putting a price on such services, they don't really care about others. How could they? And if they don't really care, can they be someone who can really help you spiritually? Obviously not. Traditionally, while true teachers don't take money for their teaching, they do expect a dedicated monk or full-time student to give up all their possessions, even if it is nothing. Generally, people want to support the path they believe in and put their possessions at the disposal of their teacher. This can be as little as a whistle, a bowl of rice, a bike, or as much as an estate or multinational corporation. Or in my case, with my teacher, nothing. But as has been said, it is easier for a rich man to get to heaven than for a cigarette to get through the eye of a needle. So most students usually have little or nothing anyway, because it's too hard for people with big bucks to give up anything, although it has been known to happen. It is fine to support teachers. In fact, it is a spiritual obligation and a tradition as old as time. In some parts of Asia, monks line up to be given food from the townspeople, who are also poor. But the townspeople still support the monks, those who have given up all else to devote their lives to finding or serving God, and thus spiritually serving the people. Many cultures not only provide food, but work, furniture, or whatever they have to offer. So it is fine to offer or give teachers what you can, even money, and such possessions in this modern world. But a true teacher doesn't expect it, demand it, or require it. And nothing will be different between you regardless. A true teacher doesn't charge, or expect to get anything materially from his work, period. He knows that the universal spirit takes care of its servants. A true teacher will work with you as long as you truly and totally dedicate your life to becoming an instrument of universal will. If you are truly sincere in this yourself, you will give everything you have to your teacher. But again, it is not expected, and I've seen it done otherwise myself. But what if you have nothing to give, as in my case? No one cares, if they are legitimate. On the other hand, if you have a lot to give and you don't want to, it shows how sincere you aren't, and how much selfishness and greed has a hold on you. But again, I've seen it done, and wealthy students accepted, even though their selfish greed still has hold over them. But what can you expect when all students are still under control of their selfish separate selves? When that is still in control, it's easy to give nothing if you have nothing to give, but hard if you do. Tithing for community or church activities to help others is an entirely different issue, involving householder-type situations, and fine if you agree with the work that's being done or the support being given with those funds. A student who becomes a monk generally gives up everything when they join a traditional order, whether it is to the order or to a more needy cause. But if they have nothing, it makes no difference. 2. Telling you or others telling you to do anything the teacher says, regardless of what it is. Because a true teacher has transcended their separate self and ego, they have no need or desire to be right or to control you. Most importantly, he is very concerned that you are not controlled by anyone else, whether it's him, someone else, or your selfish separate self. He will point out the truth to you, urge you to give control of yourself to your inner being, and do what you know is right, but only what you know is right. A true teacher will be the first to tell you that if he ever tells you something that is truly contrary to the dictates of your inner voice, something is wrong, and do not listen to it, and run, don't walk, to the nearest exit. Just make sure it isn't the voice of your separate self that is trying to throw you off course. Number 3, the teacher pursues students. True teachers are here to serve you, but it is not a pleasant task. They neither like having students or followers, nor personally want them, but they will accept them if it is the will of God, and the student really wants to change. But they also know that only those who really want to change, and really want the teacher to dispel their illusions, are up to the great task of changing. A true teacher may show up in your life if you're praying for that, but even then, if you want a true teacher, you will have to pursue the teacher, indicate or prove your readiness and dedication, and specifically ask him to be your teacher. 4. The teacher stresses self, boosts your ego, or tells you of the great things yourself can accomplish, or abilities and power yourself can attain. The true teacher is not there to reinforce or empower yourself. The true teacher is there to help you dethrone the separate self and crown your inner self as your new Lord. He may tell you of what you will selflessly be able to accomplish when you change, but all abilities and powers are attributed to surrendering to and being in the service of God. Number 5. Promises of wealth or success. The true teacher will not tell you that following their teachings will make you more successful, wealthy, or that you will benefit in any material way as a result of spiritual growth. The true teacher will tell you that there are only 3 benefits, none of which you can take to the bank. A, the peace of mind that comes from making your separate self your servant instead of your master, and B, the joy that comes from helping others, and C, real freedom. 6. They push their dogma. A true teacher has no need to make other people accept their teachings are true and should be followed. They know that people will not see until they're ready, and also know that truth is truth, and those who are ready will come to the same conclusion in time. 7. The teachings are like a political rally, based in emotion and contrived issues that work on the group's popular sentiment, and they make a show of spirituality. Many false teachers control people via charisma and rhetoric. A true teacher is charismatic, intense, and inspirational, but the words will always have reason, purpose, meaning, and be based in simple truths and unselfish love. Clearly defining this for you is difficult. You need to feel enough of your inner voice to know the difference. For instance, I once went to a lecture by a famous guru from India. One of the things that told me something was false about this person was that he was blessing people with an ostrich feather, supposedly sending energy through it. Why did he need a feather, let alone the fancy ostrich feather? It was purposeless, other than being an impressive show. And it did make for a great spiritual show, which distracted from the lack of real spirituality. But the first thing that really made my inner alarms go off, and told me something was wrong, was that they made the men sit on one side of the auditorium, and the women on the other, even couples. What for? If it is a celibate path, that's fine. If you are a follower or a student of such a path, and those were your beliefs, fine. They aren't really harmful to anyone. But it was a public lecture for the masses, and it's not like people were making out or having sex in the aisles, offending the guru, who shouldn't be offended if he were for real anyway. The interaction between the polarities, sexes, is the foundation of life and creation throughout the universe, not just human life. Mandatorily dividing the sexes at a public lecture, even if it was to minimize distractions, was absurd, overtly controlling, and it was overriding my free will and all others who wanted to sit with their spouses, dates, or soulmates without even a really good reason. It was thus very wrong in the sense of false, and being against the flow of the universe. It was nothing but a power trip, perhaps based in Indian culture, but ridiculous, and a power trip nonetheless. A true teacher may still have trappings of their culture, but they have transcended the limitations and falsehoods of their culture, and hold unselfish love above all else, including their own tradition. Like I said, deep down in my inner voice, alarms were going off. There are some ashrams or monasteries that practice celibacy, and men and women will keep separate quarters, but that's far different, and it is right for that path. That doesn't trigger my inner voice alarms at all, but at this lecture, the sexual separation was purposeless and untrue, an action that reeked of ego and control for the sake of control. What this false guru was doing made me cringe inside, and would do the same for anyone who was really seeking true spirituality, rather than looking for a spiritual ego trip. 8. Their ego gets offended for any reason. Again, a true teacher has transcended their selfish separate self, and with it, the separate self's defensive ego. Ego changes to become nothing but selfless confidence. The knowingness that they can do whatever the universal spirit requires of them, and that forces of the universal spirit will work through them if it is within universal will. Questioning them about anything, insulting them, or verbally attacking who they are, gets no normal ego rise from them. An exception to this is if you have already become their student, then questioning them about things that are not in conflict with your inner voice is just a game yourself is playing. 9. Channeling of a certain kind, explained later and in the next chapter. 10. Lack of unselfish love. A true teacher will probably be the first person you've ever met that really loves, totally and unselfishly. He loves you more than himself. If you are at all sensitive, you will feel this. If you find instead that awareness or concern for others is lacking, or there is a lack of unselfish love, kindness and caring, it's not the real thing. Signs of a true teacher. Okay, before I get into that, I'm going to take a little break here and put on some music, and I'll see you in just a few moments.